Welcome back to the comeback season. I'm your host, Christy Kelsey from Christy Counts Macros. Today, we're talking about a season of life that so many women find confusing and lonely, and that's perimenopause. My guest, Lindsay, is here today, and she knows that season firsthand and now helps women move from depletion to peace. Welcome, Lindsay. We're so glad to have you here today.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, to get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into helping women with perimenopause?
Yeah, so my background really starts in chronic illness. I suffered 20 years in serious chronic illness with multiple disorders, diseases, and I really battled for my health for a long time. And it taught me a lot. I learned a lot in physical nutrition and movement and mindset. And once I really was able to overcome my chronic illnesses and start feeling better, I started menopause early. I started perimenopause early in my mid 30s, and it totally hit me like a hurricane. And I really didn't know what was going on. I thought maybe I was having reoccurrence of autoimmune conditions and like whatever the chronic stuff I was dealing with. And I sought out help and I wasn't really getting answers. And then I figured out through a lot of research that I'm in perimenopause. This is what's going on. And so that was a really pretty dark time for me in my life. And I think because I had felt like I just got my life back after so many years of struggle. And then now I was in this new season.
Mhm.
And I was able to take what I had learned as a nutritionist and living in chronic illness and neuroplasticity, how to rewire my brain to really help me overcome this time and get some balance back in my life. I like to call that time in my life perimenopause hell
Mhm.
because it was, and it was really dark. And then also I was able to find, I would say, more complete healing in my spiritual life at that time too. So I take all of that stuff that I went through and learned and my background in nutrition and coaching, and I now work with women in perimenopause or premenopause and through the menopause transition to help them find some stability. And really I'm kind of known as the menopause energy expert because in menopause, it's a time of major depletion. Everything is changing. And not only are we feeling tired and fatigued, but emotionally, we are really depleted. We're really disconnected from ourselves and trying to figure out what's happening.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that introduction. And I've had a lot of different illnesses in my life as well, and I'm just curious when someone is suffering from different chronic illnesses, how do you parse out the chronic illness versus the perimenopause symptoms?
Yeah, I mean, it can be difficult, but the thing about perimenopause is it's kind of a time where our body's set on fire. So anyone who has a chronic illness will just have amplified symptoms. Say if you have an autoimmune disease, you're going to start to see more flare-ups usually, more body aches, more pain, increased fatigue. So it's going to almost exacerbate what you have going on. And that, for the person who's going through it, that's where the confusion comes. But for someone like me, it's like, well, let's look at the baseline on what we can do to kind of calm this fire down in the body. So then you can get back to your baseline, and then we can start kind of building up those nutrient levels and like emotional system regulation or how we manage stress, how we view things, things like that. So it can be hard sometimes if someone's really spiraling, particularly if they're dealing with the dark side of menopause, which is depression and anxiety, an area that's not well talked about. And when women seek help in this area, they're often recommended an antidepressant, which is kind of like a band-aid approach. And so, but there's a lot of ways that we can decipher those two things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. And how do you stop that downward spiral when someone is in that phase of the perimenopause symptoms?
Yeah, I mean, it's different depending on where I'm kind of meeting the woman. I'd like to meet women where they are and kind of walk with them and find that out a little bit. So if it's in the very beginning, usually that first 1 to 2 years in perimenopause is when things are like, holy cow, I'm totally being railroaded right now.
Yeah.
Versus if I see someone who's in late perimenopause, who's closer to that transition into menopause, things have mellowed out a little bit. There's not so much disruption. And so usually I will start by calming inflammation. So getting inflammation down can really help. Looking at lifestyle factors like sleep is one of the biggest things that starts that spiral. So maybe a woman starts having disrupted sleep, and then maybe that goes on for a couple months. Maybe that's been going on a year. And that's where we can start to see some major downward spirals. So start looking at the habits, maybe even supplementation that we need to start seeing better sleep. If a woman's dealing with really intense hot flashes and night sweats, then we can address those in nutritional ways. So, bringing more calcium and magnesium on, getting more exercise. We know statistically that increasing exercise really reduces hot flashes. And then working on some of the emotional stability. So, if we can regulate the emotions a little bit, you're having those big high highs and low lows,
Mhm.
that those are some places that we can start.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, what tools do you use for the emotional regulation?
Yeah, so it really depends on what someone needs. So if I'm dealing with a woman who's has emotional eating issues,
Mhm.
which is really driving some, there's a lot of brain chatter, there's a lot of shame. There can be weight gain involved in perimenopause. Most women gain between 5 and 10 pounds or more. So sometimes we have to start there and we need to really look at how can we overcome emotional eating or at least face and embrace it.
Mhm.
But if someone's not dealing with that, we can look at ways to manage stress. So, things like prayer, meditative prayer, tapping, nature walks, stretching or listening to music, sound therapy. So again, there's lots of tools. It depends on the woman and what they respond to, and we really kind of flesh this out together. So, but those would be some ways. There's lots of ways to do emotional system regulation.
Yeah, and I love that you have a whole battery of tools because every woman is different. I was just thinking how some of my friends going through perimenopause have really strong, obvious symptoms, and some of my friends are just like, no, not much is happening here, even though, we're all the same age and our bodies are changing, but for some women, those symptoms hit harder than others. So I guess it makes sense to have different kinds of tools for different people.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. It's kind of like what's that inroad in? What's going to be on the forefront that we need to address first? As a nutritionist, a lot of times we go right towards physical nutrition, but actually sometimes I start with emotional nutrition. So really working on those emotions, that mindset, the perspective on this change. So, sometimes depression and anxiety don't come just from hormone disruptions, although they can start there, but it comes from kind of feeling that loss of self or that I'm getting older or this is the end or, seeing the changes in body. So we really do have to start more on that emotional before we can even think about dietary changes and any of that stuff. So yeah, the inroad is a little bit different for everyone.
Mhm. Yeah, and I don't know if this is even possible because I know hormones are so very complicated, but is there a way to give our listeners like a brief rundown of what happens in perimenopause?
Sure, I can simplify this a little bit. So, generally speaking, in perimenopause, we're seeing a downward shift in estrogen and progesterone, and really testosterone, which isn't as well talked about. So, those are going to be when we first maybe start to have some mood swings, or start to have more aggressive PMS. We can start to see heavier periods, or even just irregular cycles.
Mhm.
So that would be kind of like what's happening. But I think when we think about functional medicine and in that larger picture, this is really a decline in communication of our endocrine system. And so what that means is our endocrine system is kind of the system that regulates a lot of our hormones. So that's going to be our hypothalamus, pituitary gland, thyroid gland, adrenal gland, and ovaries. And that's our main endocrine system. And then what affects that also too is our gut and our brain and our fat tissues, right? So there's a lot kind of happening, but it's really the communication breakdown in this system that's the larger picture, what we would consider root cause of what's going on in the body. And so basically, estrogen touches every cell in the body. Thyroid hormone touches every single cell in the body, from our brain to our lungs, to our muscles, to our stomach, our guts. And so you can see when we start to have fluctuations in these major hormones and disruption in our endocrine system, there's a reason why the symptoms can be widespread. The talk now is that symptoms can range from 65 to 150 different symptoms in perimenopause. And that's because this hormone system is touching so many things, from brain fog to hot flashes to gut, digestive upset to body aches. Like it can be all or, a few. Like you said, some of your female friends aren't really experiencing anything major and others are. So does that help?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then when so you use nutrition as a tool as well. So I know as a nutrition coach, a lot of women I coach, they come to me wanting fat loss and they're already not eating enough. How does that play into the perimenopause symptoms when somebody is not getting enough nutrients or even enough calories?
Yeah, this is actually a big deal, and the risk here is that women are at high risk for eating disorders two times in their life, in their teenage years and in perimenopause. And so generally when women start to have composition changes like fat and muscle start changing, they want to eliminate calories and exercise harder. This is kind of the worst thing we can almost do and make you feel worse. One, you're not getting the nutrients you need. And two, over exercising is stimulating higher cortisol levels through the adrenal cortex. So you're going to become under more stress, which means, right, less sleep, more depletion. And then if you're not eating the calories you need, it's going to increase insulin resistance. So I think when I meet women in this state, the first thing I do is just provide some guidance and education on what's going on in the body. And particularly if we're getting into high restrictions, like if someone's going full carnivore or, they're only eating protein. And what we know from science is that really balancing out our diet between complex carbs and fibers, healthy fats and lean proteins can actually start to help us lose weight. So and reset our metabolism a little bit. So I think just providing some education and breaking down false belief systems from our diet culture. If I've with a woman who's been on a bunch of different diets, I mean our the diet industry is $180 billion a year industry. They don't want you to get better. So if there's that, or if there's just a general lack of knowledge, like I've never really been into nutrition, I don't really care about my plate, I just need to eat to survive. So coming at those in different directions and providing some resources can help balance that out a little bit. And I think when women start to feel better, that starts to go away. If we can give some parameters of like, better choices, and they start to feel better, and then I think there's a piece of also self-acceptance that's happening there. Women love to shame themselves, and I'm a product of that. We all are, and kind of working, that's a little bit more of the emotional stuff, kind of working on that. Then the food stuff can kind of come along with it.
Yeah. So, what are some red flags that you see in someone who their body's asking for more nourishment or more rest instead of like more lack and discipline?
I mean, in perimenopause, it's almost like this crazy time where there's just so much going on. And I think that there's kind of two camps here is that some women are doing everything they can possibly do. They're taking every supplement they see on Instagram. They're doing whatever diet they think is the best for them. And then we have other women who are going, to their doctor straight towards HRT and antidepressants and really targeting it that way. And so kind of meeting women where they are and where they want to go and just and usually you can kind of see like if someone comes to me and they haven't been sleeping good for 6 months to a year, like we need to kind of target. That's a huge red flag because sleep it affects everything and it really starts that spiral intensely. If I'm working with someone who's like really stressed about weight, like it's really bothering them. Maybe they've been fit their whole life and they're dealing with weight, or maybe they came into perimenopause overweight. You know, that those types of things can be a real psychological barrier that we have to overcome. And so that can be kind of a red flag for me, like, okay, we need to really address this first and focus physically to give them some satisfaction, but then dig down into that more of that psychological piece. And I would say the psychology of food comes into really big play there and those cultural beliefs. Does
Yeah.
that help? Did that answer the question?
Yeah. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah.
So you also talked about movement. What kind of movement do you recommend for someone who's in perimenopause?
Yeah, generally, if someone's in perimenopause, their cortisol system is already fairly strained. So in the beginning, we really think about more meditative movements like nature walks and stretching, and doing more intense exercise on days we feel good, as opposed to, oh my gosh, my body's changing and I have to like kill it. I'm doing hits, I'm doing Orange Theory, I'm doing all these crazy things that can actually almost exacerbate. But so starting with more, I guess, nurturative movement where we're nurturing ourselves and then trying to work more into strength training. So when we start seeing our metabolism slow down, which is a natural part of aging, but particularly in this time, we start seeing maybe some belly fat, that visceral fat gaining, right? We're losing muscle. We want to start to try to strength train in a very gentle way. And this can be hard for men. It's hard for me. Like I've always been a cardio queen. When I started perimenopause, I'm like, I want to keep doing these like big cardio things that I've done, but gearing down and it's a total mindset shift to think about gaining strength.
Mhm.
And sometimes when we gain strength, we it actually shows on the scale that we've gained weight. But
Mhm.
what we're trying to do is switch that body composition around. So we're turning some of that fat into muscle, right? We're building enough muscle that we're burning more fat is really what's happening, right? And so those are some things. It really depends if a woman has the energy to do that. But I would say in the beginning, if you haven't been exercising, just going for walks and doing maybe little hits on your walks, like you're walking a regular pace and then maybe you pick it up for 1 minute and then slow back down. Like those would be some easy ways to start. And if you're really feeling miserable, just stretching,
Mhm.
stretching, stretching, getting back in tune with your body and the messages it's telling you can be really powerful.
Yeah. So for a woman who has been out of tune with her body for so long, maybe she's been busy with a family or a career or things like that. How do you help her tune into that sense of
Yeah. I mean, it can be really hard in this time. Women tend to lose their purpose, like especially if you're a mom, you kind of lose yourself in being a mom, and that has been your purpose. Or maybe you've been a career woman or both, and you're in a corporate job or a demanding career, and a lot of times women feel lost and kind of empty at this time. And so generally, I start working with women by asking them, what brings you joy? And most women cannot answer this. And it's really, at first it's surprising, but then it like, oh, that makes sense because we've been giving and giving and giving and living in survival mode and, going to PTA, picking up kids, or we're doing our corporate job, maybe we're flying, whatever it is, we have obligations and we're just superstars. We're powering through. And we kind of forget what are the things that we love to do, what brings us joy. But digging down and really taking time, either through journaling or gratitude work, trying to figure out what is that peace, what actually brings me joy. So that can kind of then lead us into our greater purpose, right? Because I think God puts desires on our heart for a reason, right? If we have a heartbeat, we have a purpose, we're here for a reason. And I think finding that out, that can be the start of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes it takes a while to figure out what that purpose is. I know it did for me. I was a stay-at-home mom for over 20 years, and my kids were starting to leave the house, and I didn't want to just go get any old job just to, be filling my time. I wanted it to be something purposeful and meaningful, and eventually I landed on becoming a nutrition coach, which I absolutely love. I love working with women and helping them with their different goals, but I definitely believe that that was a purpose that was placed on me from God, and I'm still trying to figure out where that's going to lead me, but here we are on this podcast and having this conversation. And so I would love to hear more about how you use that in your coaching.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard. It kind of depends on, how open someone is, but I think it's important to think about that this time can be really empowering and that over 50% of women change careers during perimenopause and in the menopause transition and find careers that they truly love and enjoy. And so really, I think connecting with ourselves again and starting to really reflect on what those desires are and looking deeper at them. And you're right, it can be really hard. I've struggled a lot in my life with what is my greater purpose? Why am I here? What is this about? And so, getting connected with that can take some time. And usually, journaling is how I help women get there to start with and to start looking at everything that's good in their life. And then to start really digging down into what are the desires of our heart and who are we really, meaning really walking in humility. And humility is often misunderstood, but humility is really knowing ourselves, knowing our strengths and knowing our weaknesses. And I think God gives us really good strengths, and then we have these weaknesses that I think can be strengths too if we look at them the right way because they help us connect in our community and to other people who want to support us in areas we don't necessarily, things don't come easy to us. So
Mhm.
if we can get down in humility, seek out what brings joy to our life, and then really see ourselves in real and true light, right? And I think seeking out what are these strengths? What are the things, the natural talents God has given me, and how do I want to use them? Like, for instance, as an example for me, I struggled most of my life in deep suffering, really deep suffering. And I never knew what it meant. Why am I suffering so much more than what I feel like other people are? And that can be perception, but I realize now that it was part of my greater purpose that I have compassion and empathy when I work with women who are in deep suffering, who are really struggling. And so I'm able to live out my purpose through kind of having to carry that cross and walk through that fire. And all women have this. We have all had trials and things that we've been through. And I think getting to know what those strengths are, what those trials are, what the purpose and all that is can help lead us towards, maybe you've always wanted to start a school and you do that. Or maybe you've always wanted to have an herb farm, or, you love herbal medicine and you go back to school for that. Like, this can be a really powerful way to connect to ourselves.
Mhm.
And, in session, it's a little bit easier to kind of dig this out, right? When you're working with someone than to explain exactly how does it happen. There's not a formula. It's really that interpersonal communication can help bring it to light.
Yeah, I think that's great. I love um, to work with the logical levels. Do you know about the logical levels?
No.
So the very base of the logical levels is environment. And then, a couple levels up, you've got beliefs and values. And at the very top of the pyramid is identity, and then above that is purpose. So the higher we are to the top of the pyramid, like if we make changes from behavior, that's less likely to, or yeah, environment. If we make changes of just our environment, we're less likely to stick to the changes than if we make changes from that identity, like this is who I am, that's not going to change. Um, so I've had opportunities to coach women on that, and when they get that identity piece or that purpose piece, it makes such a huge difference in how they go about achieving their goals.
Yeah, I love that you put it in those terms. I never really thought about it in those levels, but I do think identity is a big piece of it, and our perception of our own identity can sometimes be um I guess, skewed in
Mhm.
everything that we've been through. And so bringing that really into light it can be a process, but it's an important piece, like you said, in order to really get to the transformation that we want to see and really walk in the path that we're meant to and feel good. I mean, let's face it, women want to feel good. We want to know where we're going. We want to have a plan, but I think there's also a lot of divine guidance in that and providence, if you will.
Yeah. Well, there was a time in my life where I felt called to be a mother, and I that was my purpose, my identity for a really long time, and I'm still like that's still a huge priority for me. My family is right at the top for me, and but there I knew that there was more. You know, I'm 50 years old. My kids are almost gone out of the house. They're not going to need me as much anymore, but I feel like I still have a lot to give. And
Yeah.
I know there are a lot of women out there who feel the same way. Like, just because you're going through this shift in midlife doesn't mean that's the end. We're reinventing ourselves. We're not dead yet.
I know. And that's such a good point because I always like to say this isn't the end, it's the beginning.
Yeah.
You get to truly start living now because kind of that first half of our life is almost in service, particularly for women, to others
Yeah.
and or careers and like all that. But this is the time in our life where our body is forcing us to really look inside. And that's what can cause some of that depression and flatness is that I don't know. I don't know what I want to do and I'm not sure, but you're so right. This is begin again. It's like a great place to be. And I think also that we can offer so much. You know, recently I have worked with some younger women and, I feel like all in 1 month they said to me, "Oh, I look at you as a mother figure." And I was like, "What? Aren't we peers?" Like, but then you really realize, oh, wow, I have something to offer that next generation that's behind me through my lived experience. And I think there's something so powerful in and that there's not something lost. We've gained a ton of wisdom. We have a ton to offer. And how do we want to use that? That can be such a neat place to be.
Yeah. Um, I saw this post on Instagram the other day and it just made me laugh. And it was this woman and she said, nobody told Gen X about menopause and we're mad about it. And it just reminded me of that when you said that because our generation is attacking perimenopause and menopause in a different way than our mothers and grandmothers did. It used to be we don't talk about those things, but as Gen Xers, we're not going to stand for that. We're going to figure this out and we're going to do it different.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a an amazing thing to think about is that, to get rid of that shame and that, oh, that's women's stuff. Like we don't talk about that. But also to bring to light that women are dealing with perimenopause and exacerbated symptoms at a higher rate than our parents did or our mothers and grandmothers. And a lot of that has to do with our toxic environment and the impact on our, estrogen and our endocrine system from these toxic disruptors. So I think that's something else to bring to light. Like we're somewhat of a victim of our toxic environment and what we're dealing with. And so also bringing that to light to younger women.
Mhm.
How can we do better on detoxing and pulling these toxic things out of our lives so when you get to perimenopause, you're not in the situation that a lot of us are right now, where we just got hit by a hurricane and we're like, holy cow, what happened? Like, I thought this was gonna be like a 1 day transition or so, or didn't even give it a thought.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we're in a power position to really help the generation behind us, or below us. I don't know how you say it, front, behind, but that's coming, and then really take those lessons from, yeah, our mothers and grandmothers about it's okay to talk about this. This is an empowered state of life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. If there's one piece of advice you could leave our listeners today, what would that be?
I would say don't give up. Seek help sooner than later. I have so many women who say to me, I wish I would have sought help sooner. There's a lot of practitioners out there who can support you. And whether you're going the HRT realm or natural menopause, or you're doing both, seek help now. You can start feeling better. Yeah, don't wait. That's like the worst thing you can do. And if you feel like you can't figure it out on your own, yeah, reach out for the help you need.
Awesome. Well, Lindsay, thank you so much for being with us today. How can our listeners find you?
Yeah, they can find me on my website at menopausewithlindsay.com, or my handle is at menopausewithlindsay on all my socials. And if listeners want a way out of perimenopause hell, I have a guide for them that's just kind of an in path or in way into the three pillars we talked about today: the physical, emotional, and spiritual. And they can find that on my website, or on my socials. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here. And for all of our listeners, perimenopause can feel like you're losing control, but it's also a powerful invitation to rebuild, refocus, and rise stronger than ever. Your comeback starts now. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share with somebody you know so that we can help all the women. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.